The bank manager whispered into the phone. Mrs. Chen, your husband is here right now with a woman who looks exactly like you. They're trying to access your joint safety deposit box. I smiled, set down my coffee, and replied calmly, let them try. I emptied that box 3 days ago. My name is Sarah Chen, and for 15 years I believed I was living the perfect life. A successful husband, a beautiful home in the suburbs of Connecticut, 2 wonderful children, and a career I had sacrificed piece by piece to support the man I loved. But that phone call on a rainy Tuesday morning in October changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my husband, and most importantly, myself. Let me take you back to where it all began. I met David Chen at a mutual friend's wedding in Boston when I was 26 years old. He was charming, ambitious, and had the kind of smile that made you forget every red flag your gut was trying to show you. He was working as a junior analyst at a prestigious investment firm, and I was a rising star at a marketing agency downtown. We were both hungry for success, both driven by the immigrant dream our parents had instilled in us since childhood. Our courtship was a whirlwind. 3 months of dinner dates, weekend getaways, and promises whispered in the dark. He proposed on a snowy Christmas Eve down on one knee in front of my parents' modest home in Queens. My mother cried. My father shook his hand and welcomed him into our family. I said yes without hesitation, believing with every fiber of my being that I had found my forever. We got married the following spring in a ceremony that cost more than my parents' annual income. David insisted on the best of everything. The venue was a historic mansion overlooking the Hudson River. The flowers were imported from Holland. The guest list included partners from his firm, clients worth millions, and family members I had never met who flew in from Taiwan and California. I remember standing at the altar, looking into his eyes, and thinking that I was the luckiest woman in the world. How naive I was. The first few years of our marriage were everything I had dreamed of. David climbed the corporate ladder with a determination that bordered on obsession, and I supported him every step of the way. When he needed to work late, I brought dinner to his office. When he had to travel for business, I managed our home alone without complaint. When he suggested I take a step back from my career to focus on starting a family, I agreed, believing it was a temporary sacrifice for our greater future. Our daughter Emma was born 3 years into our marriage. She had David's eyes and my smile, a perfect blend of both of us. 2 years later, our son Michael arrived, completing what I thought was our perfect family. I threw myself into motherhood with the same intensity I had once devoted to my career. I joined the PTA-organized neighborhood events and became the wife and mother everyone admired. On the surface, we were the picture-perfect American family. But beneath that polished exterior, cracks were beginning to form. It started small. David began coming home later and later, always with explanations that seemed reasonable at the time. A client dinner that ran long, a deal that needed his personal attention, a flight delayed due to weather. I believed every word because I had no reason not to. He was my husband, the father of my children, the man who had promised to love and cherish me until death do us part. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I chose to ignore. The way he would angle his phone away from me when texting, the business trips that seemed to increase in frequency and length, the receipts I occasionally found for restaurants I had never been to, for hotels and cities he had supposedly visited alone. But I was so busy being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect hostess, that I convinced myself I was imagining things. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday. David had left for what he called an important business trip to Chicago 3 days earlier. He had kissed me goodbye at the door, promised to call every night, and reminded me that this deal could make or break his partnership prospects. I had smiled, handed him his coffee, and told him I believed in him. Those were the last words I said to him as his wife who trusted him completely. That Tuesday morning, I was in the kitchen making breakfast for the kids when my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was First National Bank, the institution where David and I had kept our joint accounts for over a decade. I assumed it was a routine call about an account statement or a new credit card offer. I answered with the polite tone I always used for such calls. Mrs. Chen, this is Margaret Wilson, the branch manager at First National. Yes, this is she. How can I help you? There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of pause that makes your stomach drop even before you hear the words that follow. Mrs. Chen, I'm calling because there's a situation here at the bank that I felt you should be aware of immediately. I set down the spatula I was holding. Emma and Michael were at the table arguing about who got the last pancake. I walked into the living room away from their innocent ears. What kind of situation? Your husband, Mr. David Chen, is here right now. He's requesting access to your joint safety deposit box. I almost laughed. Of course David was at the bank. Maybe he had come back early from Chicago and needed something from the box. It wouldn't be the first time he had surprised me by returning from a trip ahead of schedule. Okay, I said slowly. Is there a problem with the authorization? Another pause. Longer this time. Mrs. Chen, he's not alone. There's a woman with him. And I don't know how to say this, but she looks remarkably like you. Same height, same build, similar features. She's wearing a wedding ring, and your husband introduced her to our staff as his wife. The world stopped spinning. I gripped the back of the couch to steady myself, my knuckles turning white against the fabric. My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, 1,000 explanations, but none of them made sense. None of them could explain why my husband was at our bank with another woman pretending to be me. Mrs. Chen, are you still there? Yes, I whispered. I'm here. I recognized something was wrong because I've known you for years. You've been coming to this branch since you opened your first account with us. The woman with your husband. She may look similar, but she's not you. I wanted to alert you before we proceed with anything. In that moment, Margaret Wilson became my unexpected ally. A woman I had exchanged pleasantries with over the years, never knowing that one day she would be the one to pull back the curtain on my husband's deception. Margaret. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Can you stall them? Tell them there's a system issue or something. I need time. Of course, Mrs. Chen. Take all the time you need. I hung up and stood in my living room, the sounds of my children's laughter drifting in from the kitchen. Everything looked the same. The family photos on the mantel, the throw pillows I had carefully arranged, the morning sunlight streaming through windows I had cleaned just yesterday, but nothing would ever be the same again. My first instinct was to call David and demand an explanation, to scream, to cry, to ask him how he could do this to me, to us, to our family. But something stopped me. A voice in my head that sounded remarkably like my grandmother's, the woman who had survived war and famine and loss, the woman who had taught me that in moments of crisis, the wise woman thinks before she acts. So instead of calling my husband, I called my lawyer. Patricia Hayes was a woman I had met at a charity gala 3 years earlier. She specialized in family law and had a reputation for being ruthless in divorce proceedings. At the time, I had joked to David that I hoped I would never need her services. He had laughed and said we were forever. Now I was dialing her number with shaking hands. Patricia, it's Sarah Chen. I need to see you today. It's urgent. To her credit, Patricia didn't ask questions over the phone. She simply told me to come to her office at noon and assured me that whatever was happening, we would figure it out together. After hanging up, I made another call. This one was to my brother James, a private investigator who had spent 15 years uncovering secrets people wanted to stay hidden. I had always been grateful that he chose to use his skills legally, even though I knew the stories he could tell would make your hair stand on end. James, I need your help. What's wrong? Are the kids okay? The kids are fine. It's David. Something is very wrong, and I need you to find out everything. Everything, James. I don't care what it costs or how long it takes. My brother was silent for a moment. Then he said the words I needed to hear. I'm on it. Don't do anything until you talk to me. And Sarah, whatever this is, you're going to be okay. You're stronger than you know. And with those arrangements in place, I returned to the kitchen where my children were now finishing their breakfast. I kissed each of them on the head, told them I loved them, and drove them to school with a smile plastered on my face. They had no idea that their mother's world had just collapsed. They would never know how hard I fought to keep it together in those moments. After dropping off the kids, I drove to the bank. I know what you're thinking. Why would I go there? Why would I risk confronting David and his accomplice before I had a plan? But I had to see for myself. I had to look into the eyes of the woman who was impersonating me, who was helping my husband steal from our family, who had somehow wormed her way into a life I had built with my own hands. I parked across the street and waited. 20 minutes later, David emerged from the bank. He was wearing the gray suit I had picked out for him last month, the one I said made him look distinguished. Beside him was a woman who from a distance could have been my twin, same dark hair styled in a similar cut, same build and height. She was wearing a dress I didn't recognize, something expensive and tailored. On her left hand, a ring glittered in the morning sun. They were laughing. That's what destroyed me more than anything else. Not the deception, not the fraud, but the way he looked at her, the way his head tilted back in genuine amusement at something she said. He used to look at me that way. In the early years before the late nights and the business trips before I became more housekeeper than wife, I had forgotten what it felt like to make him laugh like that. They got into a car I didn't recognize, a sleek black Mercedes that was definitely not the practical Honda Accord David drove to work every day. As they pulled away from the curb, I memorized the license plate number and texted it to my brother. Then I drove to my lawyer's office. Patricia Hayes had this kind of presence that made you feel simultaneously terrified and protected. She was in her late 50s with silver hair she wore in a sharp bob and eyes that missed nothing. Her office walls were lined with diplomas and awards testimony to decades of winning battles most people thought were unwinnable. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything. The phone call from the bank, the woman who looked like me, my husband who was supposed to be in Chicago but was instead in Connecticut with someone else. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me with an expression I couldn't read. "Sarah, do you want to save your marriage?" The question caught me off guard. I had come here expecting her to immediately start talking about divorce proceedings, about protecting my assets, about custody arrangements. Instead, she was asking me what I wanted. "I don't know," I admitted. 24 hours ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Now I'm not sure what I want, but I know I need to understand what's happening before I make any decisions. Patricia nodded slowly. That's the right answer. Too many women come to me wanting to rush into divorce before they fully understand their situation. They let emotion drive their decisions, and they end up regretting it. You're already ahead of the game by thinking clearly. She pulled out a legal pad and began writing. Here's what we need to do. First, we need to find out exactly who this woman is and what her relationship is with your husband. Your brother can help with that. Second, we need to assess your financial situation. Bank accounts, investments, property, everything. You mentioned they were trying to access a safety deposit box. What's in it? I thought for a moment. Our important documents. Birth certificates, passports, the deed to our house, some jewelry my mother gave me when we got married, and cash. David always insisted on keeping cash reserves. How much cash? About $50,000. Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. That's a significant amount to keep in a box. Do you know why he wanted that much cash on hand? He said it was for emergencies, in case of a market crash or something. He worked in finance. I trusted his judgment. We'll need to investigate that further. In the meantime, I want you to go to the bank and empty that box, today. Take everything and put it somewhere safe, somewhere your husband doesn't know about. Can I do that? Legally. It's a joint box. You have every right to access its contents. And given what we suspect your husband may be planning, I'd say it's prudent to act quickly. I left Patricia's office with a list of instructions and a weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. But I also felt something else growing alongside the pain and betrayal. Determination. Whatever David was doing, whoever this woman was, I was not going to let them destroy me. I was not going to be the naive wife who gets blindsided by divorce papers and left with nothing. I was going to fight. My first stop was the bank. Margaret Wilson was waiting for me. She had found an excuse to keep David and his companion busy for over an hour, before finally telling them that the system was down and they would need to come back another day. David had been frustrated, but apparently hadn't suspected anything. He had left believing it was simply a technical issue that would be resolved soon. "Thank you," I told Margaret as she led me to the vault. "You have no idea what you've done for me today." "Mrs. Chen, I've worked at this bank for 23 years. I've seen situations like this more times than I care to count. The wife is always the last to know. I couldn't let that happen to you without at least trying to help. I opened the safety deposit box with my key, the one I had kept on my keychain since David and I first rented it together 12 years ago. Inside was exactly what I had expected. Our documents, my mother's jewelry, and stacks of cash that totaled exactly $50,000. I removed everything and transferred it to a bag I had brought for that purpose. "Mrs. Chen," Margaret said softly, "there's something else you should know." I looked up at her, bracing myself for more bad news. "Your husband has been in and out of this branch over the past few months, always alone until today. He's been making withdrawals from your joint savings account. Small amounts at first, but they've been increasing. Over the past 6 months, he's withdrawn over $75,000. $75,000. Gone, without my knowledge or consent. Why wasn't I notified?" Margaret looked uncomfortable. "The withdrawals were under the notification threshold your account was set up with. Each individual withdrawal was less than $10,000. Technically, there was no requirement to alert you." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. David knew. He knew exactly how our accounts were set up, exactly how to move money without triggering any alerts. He had been planning this for months, maybe longer, and I had been completely blind. Thank you, Margaret, for everything. I drove home in a daze, the bag of cash and documents sitting beside me on the passenger seat. When I pulled into our driveway, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house we had bought together. The house where we had raised our children. The house I had worked so hard to turn into a home. Every memory I had within those walls was now tainted by the truth of who my husband really was. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Deal went great today. We'll be back Friday. Miss you and the kids. Kyle." I stared at the message, reading it over and over. The casual tone, the easy lies. How many times had I received messages just like this one? How many times had I replied with love and support, never knowing that my husband was somewhere else with someone else? Laughing at my ignorance, I typed back a response that felt like glass in my mouth. "That's wonderful news. We miss you too. Safe travels." Then I went inside, hid the contents of the safety deposit box in a place David would never think to look, and began the process of unraveling 15 years of lies. That night after the kids were in bed, I started going through our finances, really going through them in a way I hadn't done in years. David had always handled the money. He was the finance expert after all. I had trusted him to manage our investments, our savings, our future. Now I was discovering just how misplaced that trust had been. There were accounts I had never seen before. Credit cards in David's name alone with balances that made my head spin. Transfers to accounts at banks I didn't recognize in amounts that should have been impossible without my signature. But they were there, documented in black and white evidence of a betrayal that went far beyond infidelity. My brother called at midnight. "Sarah, you need to sit down for this." I was already sitting surrounded by financial statements and a half-empty bottle of wine I had opened to steady my nerves. "Just tell me." Her name is Linda Park. She's 32 years old, originally from California, moved to New York about 8 years ago. She worked as a paralegal at a law firm downtown until about 2 years ago when she quit. Want to guess why? Tell me. She became David's executive assistant. Officially, she handles his calendar and travel arrangements. Unofficially, based on what I'm finding, she's been a lot more than that. They've been together for at least 3 years, Sarah. Maybe longer. 3 years. While I was cooking his dinners and raising his children and waiting for him to come home from business trips that were never really business trips, he had been building a secret life with another woman. "There's more," James continued. "The apartment they went to after the bank, it's a condo in Hartford. David bought it 18 months ago. It's in Linda's name, but the mortgage payments are coming from an account David controls. He's been paying for her to live there, paying for her car, paying for everything. And Sarah, the woman is pregnant." The phone slipped from my hand. I don't remember the next few hours clearly. I know I cried. I know I screamed into a pillow so my children wouldn't hear. I know at some point I fell asleep on the floor of my closet surrounded by David's suits that still smelled like his cologne, the cologne I had bought him for his birthday last year. When I woke up, my face was swollen and my throat was raw. But something else had changed during those dark hours. The pain was still there, a raw wound that would take years to heal. But alongside it was something harder, something sharper: clarity. David had spent years building his escape plan. He had stolen from our accounts, set up a home for his mistress, and was now apparently trying to clean out our safety deposit box to fund his new family. He thought I was too stupid to notice, too trusting to question him, too weak to fight back. He was wrong. I got up from the floor, washed my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was not the same woman who had answered the phone yesterday morning. She was older, wiser, and absolutely done being a fool. I picked up my phone and called Patricia. "I know what I want now," I told her. "I want everything he has coming to him, and I want to be the one who delivers it." Patricia laughed, a sound that was equal parts admiration and anticipation. "Then let's get to work." Over the next 2 weeks, while David sent me loving texts from his supposed business trip, I quietly dismantled our financial entanglements. I opened accounts in my name alone, at banks he would never think to check. I transferred my inheritance money, the funds my father had left me that I had foolishly put into joint accounts, to safety. I documented every lie, every missing dollar, every piece of evidence my brother uncovered. And I waited. David came home that Friday exactly as he had promised. He walked through the door with a smile on his face and gifts for the kids. He kissed me on the cheek and told me about the deal he had closed, the promotion he was being considered for, the bright future ahead of us. I listened to every word, nodded in all the right places, and said nothing about what I knew. "You seem different," he said that night as we got ready for bed. "Quieter than usual." "Just tired," I told him. "The kids have been running me ragged." He accepted the explanation without question. Why wouldn't he? He had been lying to me for years. He probably couldn't fathom that I would ever do the same. But I was playing a longer game now, a game David didn't even know he was part of. The following week, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. "Mrs. Chen, this is Linda Park." I gripped the phone so tightly I thought it might crack. "I know who you are." There was a long pause on the other end. "I was afraid you might. Listen, we need to talk, not over the phone, in person. There are things you need to know, things about David that you don't know yet, things that could help you." Every instinct told me this was a trap, but another part of me, the part that had learned to question everything over the past 2 weeks, wondered what she could possibly have to tell me. "Why would you help me?" Linda's laugh was bitter, nothing like the carefree sound I had heard outside the bank. "Because I just found out I'm not the only one. There's another woman, Mrs. Chen, and David has been playing both of us for fools." The phone almost slipped from my fingers for the second time that month. "Where do you want to meet?" She named a cafe downtown far from our usual neighborhoods. We agreed on the following afternoon, while David would be at work and my children would be at school. I hung up and stared at the wall. Another woman, not just one affair, but 2. How many more secrets was David hiding? How deep did this rabbit hole go? I picked up my phone again and called my brother. "James, I need you to dig deeper. There might be more than just Linda. I need to know everything, everyone, every lie he's ever told." "Are you sure you want to know?" I thought about my children sleeping down the hall, about the life I had built that was crumbling around me, about the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. "I'm sure. Whatever it takes." The next afternoon, I walked into the cafe to meet my husband's pregnant mistress. She was already there, sitting in a corner booth, looking nothing like the confident woman I had seen outside the bank. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. I sat across from her and said nothing. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "I know you have no reason to trust me." "You're right, I don't." She nodded, accepting my coldness without complaint. "I met David 4 years ago. He told me his marriage was over, that you were only staying together for the kids, that he was going to leave you as soon as Emma finished elementary school. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because he was charming and successful and made me feel special. And the bank? The safety deposit box. Her face flushed with shame. He told me there were documents he needed for the divorce. He said you were being difficult about the paperwork and he needed to access them without your knowledge. The hair, the clothes, learning to copy your signature. He said it was just a temporary measure, that soon we wouldn't have to hide anymore. I listened to her explanation, and despite everything, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. You said there's another woman. Linda's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Her name is Rachel. She's a flight attendant. David met her on one of his business trips about a year ago. He's been seeing her ever since. I only found out last week when I saw messages on his phone, messages just like the ones he used to send me, telling her he loved her, telling her he was going to leave his family for her. The irony was almost too much to bear. The mistress being betrayed just as she had helped betray me. How do you know this isn't a lie too? How do I know you're not here to feed me false information on David's behalf? Linda reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. She slid it across the table toward me. These are copies of everything. Messages, photos, bank transfers to Rachel's account. David doesn't know I have them. I made copies before he could erase the evidence. I was going to use them to confront him, but then I realized something. He's never going to change, Mrs. Chen. He's never going to stop lying. Not to you, not to me, not to Rachel. The only way any of us get out of this with anything left is if we work together. I opened the folder and began to read. The contents confirmed everything James had uncovered and more. David had been transferring money to Rachel for months, just as he had to Linda. He had bought her gifts, paid for her apartment in Miami, promised her a future together. The messages between them were intimate and detailed, painting a picture of a man who had turned deception into an art form. What do you want from me? I asked finally. I want him to face consequences, real consequences. Not just losing his wife, but losing everything he's worked for, his money, his reputation, his partnership at the firm. I'm pregnant with his child, and he's already moved on to someone new. He deserves to pay for what he's done to all of us. I looked at the woman across from me, the woman who had helped destroy my marriage, who had pretended to be me, who was now offering to help me destroy my husband in return. And if I say no, if I tell you to leave and never contact me again, Linda's eyes met mine, then I'll disappear. I'll have the baby raise it alone and pretend David Chen never existed. But you'll still be married to a man who has been lying to you for years. A man who is actively planning to leave you with nothing. The choice is yours, Mrs. Chen. I stood up from the table. I need to think about this. I understand, but Sarah, don't take too long. David is getting impatient. Whatever he's planning, it's coming soon. I left the cafe with the folder clutched in my hands, my mind spinning with possibilities. The wife, the mistress, the other woman. All of us victims of the same man, all of us holding pieces of the puzzle. And for the first time since that phone call from the bank, I began to see a way forward. That night, I lay awake listening to David snore beside me the same way he had for 15 years. To anyone watching, we were a normal married couple in a normal suburban home. They would never guess that the wife was plotting, that the husband was scheming, that underneath the surface of our comfortable life was a war about to begin. I thought about Emma and Michael, about how this would affect them when the truth came out, about the childhood I'd wanted to give them versus the reality they would have to face. Every decision I made from this point forward would shape their futures. But I also thought about myself, about the woman I had been before David, the woman with ambitions and dreams, and a career she had loved. That woman had been slowly erased over the years, replaced by a version of myself that existed only in relation to my husband, his wife, his support system, his convenient excuse. No more. Whatever came next, I was going to face it on my own terms, with the evidence I had gathered, with the allies I had found in the most unexpected places, with the strength I was discovering I had always possessed. David murmured something in his sleep and reached for me. I let him drape his arm across my waist the way he had done for years, but now his touch felt different, contaminated. Tomorrow, I would make my decision about Linda's offer. Tomorrow, I would take the next step in dismantling my husband's empire of lies. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. But tonight, I let him sleep. Let him dream about his mistresses and his money and his plans. He had no idea what was coming, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as I poured my coffee watching David adjust his tie in the hallway mirror. He looked every bit the successful investment banker, the devoted husband, the loving father. 3 days had passed since my meeting with Linda, and I had made my decision. "You seem distracted lately," David said, catching my reflection in the mirror. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Just tired. Emma's been having trouble sleeping. Bad dreams." He nodded absently, already checking his phone. "I might be late tonight. Big presentation for the Henderson account." "Of course. I'll save you a plate." He kissed my cheek on his way out, the same perfunctory gesture he had performed for years. The door closed behind him, and I waited until I heard his car pull out of the driveway before picking up my phone. "It's Sarah. I'm in. Tell me what you need." Linda's relief was palpable even through the phone. "Thank God. I was afraid you'd changed your mind." "I haven't changed anything. But we do this my way. No improvising, no emotional outbursts. We follow the plan exactly as I lay it out." "Agreed. What's the first step?" I had spent the past 3 days mapping out every possible scenario, every potential weakness in David's carefully constructed facade. My brother James had been invaluable uncovering financial records that painted a damning picture of embezzlement and fraud that went far beyond marital infidelity. "First, I need to meet Rachel." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "Are you serious? She doesn't even know about me. She thinks she's his only other." "Exactly, which is why she needs to know the truth. All 3 of us together have enough evidence to destroy him, but separately we're just angry women with accusations." Linda agreed to arrange a meeting, though I could hear the reluctance in her voice. The jealousy between mistresses was apparently just as real as the betrayal we had all experienced from the same man. 2 days later, I found myself in a hotel conference room I had rented under a false name. James had swept it for recording devices that morning, a precaution that had seemed paranoid until he actually found a listening device in the lamp. We destroyed it and proceeded with caution. Linda arrived first, her pregnancy now visible beneath her loose blouse. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, testament to sleepless nights. I wondered if she lay awake thinking about the future she had been promised, the future that was now crumbling around her, just as mine had crumbled around me. "She's on her way," Linda said, checking her phone. "I told her I was a journalist investigating David's firm. She was surprisingly eager to talk." "She suspects something." "Maybe. Or maybe she's just looking for confirmation of what she already knows." The door opened, and Rachel Chen walked in. She was younger than I expected, perhaps 28, with the kind of effortless beauty that came from youth and good genetics. She wore her flight attendant uniform, having come directly from a layover at JFK. Her eyes scanned the room, landing first on Linda's pregnant belly, then on me. "You're not a journalist," she said flatly. "No, I'm Sarah Chen, David's wife." Rachel's face went pale. She took a step backward, her hand reaching for the door handle. "Please," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm not here to attack you. None of us are. We're all victims of the same man, and I think it's time we compared notes." She hesitated, her eyes darting between Linda and me. "Who is she? Linda Park, David's other mistress, the one before you, the one he's been seeing for 3 years while promising you that you were his only one." Rachel's hand dropped from the door. She walked slowly to the table and sat down, her movements mechanical like a woman in shock. 3 years. Linda nodded. "I found out about you last week, messages on his phone, the same messages he used to send me, the same promises. He told me his marriage was over, that his wife was mentally unstable, and he was only staying for the children. He said as soon as his daughter finished middle school, he would file for divorce and we would be together." I almost laughed at the familiar script. He told Linda the same thing. Different timeline, but the same story. "His wife is crazy. The marriage is over. Just wait a little longer and everything will be perfect." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. I'm such an idiot. We all were, I said. But being fooled by a professional liar doesn't make us stupid. It makes him a monster, and monsters need to be stopped. I laid out everything we had, the financial records showing David had been embezzling from his firm for years, funneling money into offshore accounts that neither his partners nor I knew about. The evidence of fraud in several major deals that could result in criminal charges. The paper trail connecting him to Linda's apartment, Rachel's apartment, and a third property in the Bahamas that none of us had known existed. How did you find all this? Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. My brother is a private investigator. Once I knew to look, the evidence was everywhere. David was smart about hiding his affairs, but he was careless about the money. He never thought anyone would look closely enough to see the patterns. Linda leaned forward. What do we do with this go to the police? Not yet. The criminal charges are our leverage, but they're not our weapon. If we go to the authorities now, David will lawyer up and drag this out for years. He has connections, resources, friends in high places. A straight legal battle would destroy us long before it destroyed him. Then what? I smiled, and for the first time in weeks it was genuine. We let him destroy himself. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. David's entire career was built on trust. His clients trusted him with their money. His partners trusted him with their reputation. His firm trusted him to maintain the image of integrity that justified their exorbitant fees. One crack in that facade, and the whole structure would come crashing down. His firm is hosting their annual gala next month, I explained. Black tie event, all the major clients' industry press the works. David is being honored with the Partner of the Year award. It's the biggest night of his career. Rachel's eyes widened. You want to expose him there in front of everyone? I want to give him a choice. He can either accept a divorce settlement on my terms, sign over full custody of our children, and quietly resign from his firm before the evidence of his fraud becomes public. Or he can watch everything he's built burn to the ground while his colleagues, his clients, and his family see exactly who he really is. Linda shook her head slowly. He'll never agree. His pride won't let him. Then his pride will be his undoing. But I'm betting that when faced with prison time versus a quiet exit, he'll choose survival. Men like David always do. We spent the next 3 hours going over every detail. What evidence to present and when, how to approach David without tipping him off before the gala, what our individual demands would be in exchange for our silence. Linda wanted financial support for her child and a guarantee that David would never seek custody or contact. Rachel wanted nothing from him except the satisfaction of watching him fall, and I wanted everything. The house full custody of Emma and Michael, half of all marital assets, and a settlement large enough to ensure my children would never want for anything. There's one more thing, I said as we prepared to leave. After this is over, we need to disappear from each other's lives. No contact, no communication, nothing that could connect us. If David ever suspects we work together, he'll find a way to use it against us. Both women nodded. We had formed an unlikely alliance bound by shared betrayal and common purpose. But once our goal was achieved, that alliance would dissolve as quickly as it had formed. I drove home that evening feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The weight of David's deception still pressed on my chest, but now it was accompanied by something else. Hope. Purpose. The knowledge that I was no longer a passive victim waiting to be discarded. The kids were already in bed when I got home, looked after by the neighbor's teenage daughter who had been babysitting for us since Emma was born. I paid her, thanked her, and checked on my children. Emma was sleeping peacefully, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. Michael had kicked off his blankets as he always did, and I tucked them back around him. These were the moments David was willing to throw away. These precious, irreplaceable moments with our children. For what? For excitement. For validation, for the thrill of juggling multiple lives like a circus performer. I would never understand what drove him. But I no longer needed to understand. I only needed to act. David came home at midnight smelling of expensive scotch and someone else's perfume. He stumbled up the stairs and fell into bed without even acknowledging my presence. I lay beside him in the darkness, listening to his breathing slow into sleep. 3 more weeks until the gala. 3 more weeks of pretending. I could do this. For Emma and Michael, I could do anything. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation and performance. I played the role of devoted wife with an actress's precision cooking David's favorite meals, asking about his day, making love to him on the nights he wanted it, while thinking about everything I knew and everything he would lose. My lawyer Patricia had drawn up divorce papers that would strip David of virtually everything. The prenuptial agreement we had signed 15 years ago was worthless, now invalidated by his fraud and infidelity. Connecticut law was clear on that point. A spouse who dissipated marital assets through gambling addiction or transferring money to third parties could be held liable for the full amount. David had transferred hundreds of thousands of dollars to his mistresses. That money was coming back to me. James continued his investigation, uncovering more evidence with each passing day. David's fraud at the firm was even more extensive than we had initially realized. He had been manipulating client accounts for years, skimming small amounts that added up to millions. The partners had no idea their star performer was robbing them blind. "This goes beyond civil liability," James told me during one of our clandestine meetings. "We're talking federal charges, securities fraud, wire fraud, possibly money laundering, depending on how he moved the funds offshore. If this goes to trial, he's looking at 20 years minimum." "I don't want him in prison," I said. "I want him destroyed, not martyred. A man in prison can still claim he was framed, still garner sympathy from people who don't know the truth. I want him to lose everything while staying free long enough to watch it happen." James looked at me with something approaching admiration. "You've really thought this through." "I've had nothing but time to think. 15 years of marriage and I never really knew him. Now I'm making up for lost time." The gala arrived on a crisp autumn evening. David had rented a tuxedo for the occasion, and I wore a red dress I had bought specifically for this night. Red for power, red for anger, red for the blood I intended to draw. "You look stunning," David said as we drove to the venue. "I'm glad you decided to come. It means a lot to have you there when I accept the award." I wouldn't miss it for the world. The ballroom was filled with the elite of Connecticut's financial community. Partners and their wives, clients worth billions, journalists from business publications looking for their next story. I smiled and made small talk, accepting congratulations on David's success as if it were my own. And then I saw them. Linda was standing near the bar wearing a black dress that concealed her pregnancy. She caught my eye and nodded almost imperceptibly. Rachel was across the room, posing as a server she had bribed to get inside. Everything was in place. I excused myself from the conversation I was having and made my way to where David was talking with his senior partners. He was in his element, charming and confident, the perfect image of success. "Darling," I said, touching his arm, "can I speak with you privately for a moment?" He frowned slightly but excused himself from his colleagues. I led him to a small anteroom off the main ballroom, closing the door behind us. "What is it they're about to announce the award?" I took a deep breath. "I know everything, David." His expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Calculation. Assessment. The wheels turning as he tried to figure out exactly how much I knew. "What are you talking about?" "Linda Park, Rachel Chen. The condo in Hartford, the apartment in Miami, the property in the Bahamas, the $75,000 you withdrew from our joint accounts, the millions you've embezzled from your firm. Should I continue?" His face went white. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Sarah, I can explain." "No, you can't. There's nothing you could say that would explain away 3 years of lies and betrayal. But that's not why I brought you here." I handed him a manila envelope. Inside were copies of everything. Financial records, photographs, testimony from both his mistresses. Enough evidence to end his career and send him to prison. "You have 2 choices. Option 1, you sign the divorce papers my lawyer has prepared. You give me the house, full custody of the children, and a settlement of $5 million. You resign from your firm, quietly citing personal reasons, and you never contact me or our children again. And Option 2. Option 2 is that I walk back into that ballroom and tell everyone exactly who David Chen really is. Your partners, your clients, the press. By tomorrow morning, your name will be synonymous with fraud and betrayal. The FBI will be at your door by the end of the week." David's hands were shaking as he opened the envelope. He flipped through the documents, his face growing paler with each page. Who gave you all this?" "Does it matter? The question isn't how I found out. The question is what you're going to do now." He looked up at me, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw fear in his eyes. Not remorse, not regret, just the animal terror of a predator who had suddenly become prey. "I need time to think about this. You have until they call your name for that award. If you're not back in this room with signed papers by then, I'm making an announcement of my own." I left him there holding the envelope that contained the ruins of his carefully constructed life. When I returned to the ballroom, Linda caught my eye again. I gave her a small nod. It was done. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I watched the stage where the awards were being presented, half expecting David to burst through the doors and cause a scene. But he didn't appear. Not when they announced the nominees, not when they called his name for Partner of the Year, not when the room erupted in confused murmurs at his absence. Finally, my phone buzzed with a text. I signed, "Meet me at the house. We need to talk." I collected my purse and made my way to the exit, pausing only to catch Rachel's eye across the room. She raised her glass slightly in a silent toast. Revenge, it seemed, was a dish best served with champagne. David was waiting in the living room when I got home. The signed divorce papers were on the coffee table. His face was haggard, aged 10 years in the space of a few hours. "I hope you're satisfied," he said bitterly. "Satisfied my husband of 15 years has been lying to me, stealing from me, and sleeping with other women. My children's father is a fraud and a cheat. No, David, I am very far from satisfied. I loved you. In my own way, I did love you. Your way of loving involved deceiving me at every turn. If that's love, I want no part of it." He stood up, and for a moment I thought he might become violent, but the fight had gone out of him. The man before me was a shell of the confident banker who had left for work that morning. "What happens now?" "Now you pack a bag and leave. The firm will accept your resignation tomorrow. My lawyer will handle the rest. And the evidence, the fraud charges. As long as you honor our agreement, that evidence stays private. But if you ever try to contact me or the children, if you ever miss a payment, if you even think about going back on your word, everything goes to the FBI." David picked up his car keys from the counter. At the door, he turned back to look at me one last time. "I never thought you had it in you, Sarah." "Neither did I. Goodbye, David." The door closed behind him, and I was alone. I sank onto the couch, the adrenaline that had sustained me through the past few weeks finally draining away. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding, my mind struggling to process everything that had just happened. I had done it. I had faced down the man who had betrayed me and won. But as I sat in the silence of my empty living room, I realized that this was only the beginning. Tomorrow I would have to explain to Emma and Michael why their father was gone. Tomorrow I would have to start building a new life from the ashes of the old one. Tomorrow I would have to figure out who Sarah Chen was without a husband to define her. The tears came then sudden and overwhelming. Not tears of grief for my marriage, but tears of release. Years of suppressed emotions flooding out in great heaving sobs that shook my entire body. When the storm finally passed, I went upstairs to check on my children. They were still sleeping oblivious to the earthquake that had just reshaped their world. I kissed each of them on the forehead and whispered promises I intended to keep. "I will protect you. I will fight for you. I will never let anyone hurt you the way your father hurt me." Then I went to my bedroom, the bedroom I would no longer have to share with a liar, and slept more peacefully than I had in years. The next morning I called Patricia to confirm that the divorce papers were legally binding. Then I called my brother to thank him for everything he had done. Finally, I called my mother. "Sarah, what's wrong? You never call this early." "Nothing's wrong, Mom. Everything is actually going to be okay. But I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen without interrupting. Can you do that?" "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" I took a deep breath and began to talk. My mother's silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. I had just finished telling her everything from the bank manager's call to David walking out the door the night before, and now I waited for her reaction. The woman who had raised me to be strong, who had survived immigration and poverty and loss, who had always told me that family was everything. "Mom, are you still there? I'm here." Her voice was thick with emotion. I need a moment." I heard her take a shaky breath, and when she spoke again, there was steel beneath the tears. "That man looked me in the eye at your wedding and promised to take care of you. He shook your father's hand. He ate at my table every holiday for 15 years, and this whole time he was—" "I know, Mom. I want to kill him." Despite everything, I laughed. My tiny mother, barely 5 feet tall, threatening murder. "Get in line. Sarah, listen to me. You did the right thing. Your grandmother would be proud. She always said that a woman's greatest weapon is patience, and you were patient. You waited until you had everything you needed, and then you struck. That takes strength." "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm falling apart." "You're allowed to fall apart, but not yet. First, you have to tell the children, and you have to be their rock. After that, you come to me, and I'll hold you while you cry. That's what mothers are for." I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. "Will you come over when I tell them I don't think I can do it alone?" I'm already putting on my shoes, and my mother arrived within the hour, armed with groceries and the fierce determination that had carried her through decades of hardship. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug that said everything words couldn't express. "The children will be home from school soon," she said, releasing me. "Have you decided what to say? I've been rehearsing it in my head all morning. But every version sounds wrong. How do you tell an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old that their father isn't who they thought he was, that he's never coming back? You don't tell them everything, not yet. They're too young to understand the details. You tell them that Mommy and Daddy aren't going to be married anymore, that Daddy made some mistakes, and that none of it is their fault. You tell them that both their parents love them very much. Does David love them?" My mother's expression hardened. "It doesn't matter what David feels. What matters is what those children need to hear. They need to know they're loved and safe. Everything else can wait." The front door burst open at 3:15, and Emma and Michael tumbled in with their usual chaos of backpacks and lunchboxes and stories about their day. My heart clenched at the sight of them, so innocent, so unaware of how their world was about to change. "Grandma!" Michael shouted, launching himself at my mother. "Did you bring cookies?" "What kind of grandmother would I be if I didn't bring cookies?" Emma was more observant. She looked at me with those dark eyes that were so much like her father's and frowned. "Mom, have you been crying? Come sit down, both of you. Grandma and I need to talk to you about something important." They settled on the couch, Michael already munching on a cookie, Emma watching me with growing concern. I sat across from them and took a deep breath. "You know how sometimes Daddy has to go away for business trips?" They both nodded. "Well, this time Daddy isn't coming back, not to live here with us." Michael's cookie froze halfway to his mouth. "What do you mean?" "Daddy and I have decided that we're not going to be married anymore. It's called divorce, and it means that Daddy will live somewhere else now." "But why?" Emma's voice cracked. "What happened?" I looked at my mother, who gave me an encouraging nod. "Grown-ups sometimes make mistakes, sweetheart. Daddy made some mistakes that hurt our family, and because of that, we can't live together anymore. But I want you both to know that this isn't your fault. Nothing you did caused this, and both Daddy and I love you very, very much." Michael started to cry, big silent tears rolling down his cheeks. I pulled him onto my lap and held him tight. "Is Daddy a bad person?" he whispered. The question hit me like a physical blow. How do you answer that? How do you tell your child that the man they idolize, the man who taught them to ride a bike and read them bedtime stories, is capable of such profound cruelty? "Daddy did some bad things," I said carefully, "but that doesn't mean he doesn't love you. People can love someone and still make mistakes. Do you understand?" He nodded, though I could tell he didn't really understand. How could he? I barely understood it myself. Emma hadn't moved. She sat frozen on the couch, her face pale, her hands clenched in her lap. "Emma, "Talk to me, sweetheart." "I knew something was wrong," she said quietly. "I heard you on the phone last week talking to someone about lawyers. I thought maybe you were in trouble. I didn't know it was about Daddy." My heart broke for my daughter, this child who had been carrying worry in silence because she didn't want to burden her mother. I moved to sit beside her and pulled her into my arms. "I'm sorry you had to worry. I should have told you sooner, but I needed to make sure everything was going to be okay first. And it is going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Will we have to move? Will I have to change schools? No, baby, we're staying right here. This is our home. And Daddy, will we see him?" I hesitated. The truth was that I had no idea if David would try to maintain a relationship with his children. The divorce agreement gave me full custody with no visitation rights unless I approved them. I had done that deliberately, wanting to protect Emma and Michael from a man who had proven himself capable of endless deception. But I also knew that someday they might want to know their father. "We'll figure that out as we go," I said. "Right now, the most important thing is that we have each other, our little family, Grandma and Uncle James, and all the people who love us. We're going to be just fine." The rest of that day passed in a blur of tears and questions and more cookies than were probably healthy. My mother stayed for dinner and helped me get the kids to bed, answering their questions with the patience and wisdom that only grandmothers possess. When they were finally asleep, I collapsed on the couch and let myself fall apart. "It's done," I said, my voice hollow. "They know." "You did well. They needed to hear it from you in your words. Now they can start to process. They're going to hate me eventually for taking their father away." "No." My mother's voice was firm. "They might be angry for a while, but children are resilient. And when they're older, when they understand what really happened, they'll thank you for protecting them." "I hope you're right. I'm always right. Now go to bed. Tomorrow will be hard, and you need your strength." She was right about tomorrow being hard. What she didn't know was that it would be hard in ways neither of us could have anticipated. I woke to my phone ringing at 6 in the morning. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer. "Mrs. Chen, this is Detective Marcus Williams with the Hartford Police Department. I'm sorry to call so early, but we need to speak with you regarding your husband, David Chen." My blood ran cold. What happened? "There was an incident last night at a residence in Hartford. We need you to come down to the station as soon as possible." "Is David hurt? Is he dead?" "I'm not able to discuss the details over the phone, ma'am. How soon can you get here?" I arranged for my mother to come back and watch the children, then drove to Hartford in a daze. My mind raced through every possibility. Had David tried to hurt himself? Had he gone to Linda's apartment and done something terrible? Had one of his schemes finally caught up with him in a way that involved the police? The station was a squat brick building that smelled of coffee and desperation. Detective Williams met me in the lobby, a tall black man with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Chen. Let's talk in my office." He led me to a small room cluttered with files and closed the door behind us. "What is this about? Is my husband okay?" "Your husband is fine, physically at least. He's currently in custody." "Custody for what?" Detective Williams leaned back in his chair and studied me for a moment before speaking. "Last night, your husband showed up at the apartment of a woman named Linda Park. He was intoxicated and belligerent. When Ms. Park refused to let him in, he forced his way through the door and attacked her." My hand flew to my mouth. "Oh my God, is she okay? The baby?" "She's at Hartford General. She has a broken arm and some bruising, but the doctors say the baby is fine. She's lucky a neighbor heard the commotion and called 911. Relief and horror washed over me in equal measure. Linda was alive. The baby was alive. But David had done this. The man I had married, the father of my children, had attacked a pregnant woman. "There's more," Detective Williams continued. "When we arrested Mr. Chen, he was carrying documents, financial documents that appear to show evidence of fraud and embezzlement from his employer. He was also carrying a significant amount of cash, nearly $50,000. The safety deposit box. He must have gone to the bank with another fake ID, another woman posing as me, and actually succeeded this time. I don't understand. We had an agreement. He was supposed to leave quietly. What kind of agreement? I realized too late that I had said too much. The detective was watching me with renewed interest, his pen poised over a notepad. My lawyer should probably be here for this conversation. That's certainly your right, Mrs. Chen, but I want you to understand something. Based on what we've found, your husband is looking at charges for assault, breaking, and entering, and potentially multiple counts of financial fraud. If you have information that could help our investigation, now would be the time to share it. I thought about the envelope I had given David at the gala, the evidence my brother had gathered, the alliance I had formed with Linda and Rachel, everything I had done to protect myself and my children. I need to make a phone call. Patricia arrived at the station an hour later, having broken several speed limits to get there. She listened as Detective Williams explained the situation, her expression revealing nothing. "My client will cooperate fully with your investigation," she said finally. "But I need to speak with her privately first." We were given a small conference room. Patricia closed the door and turned to face me. "Tell me everything. Leave nothing out." I told her about the meeting with Linda and Rachel, the evidence we had compiled, the ultimatum I had given David at the gala, the signed divorce papers that were now in her office. "You should have told me about the other women," Patricia said when I finished, "about the alliance you formed." Would it have changed anything? It might have. The fact that you coordinated with his mistresses could be seen as conspiracy. If David's lawyers argue that you entrapped him or manipulated him into signing those papers under duress. Duress? He's been lying to me for years. He stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. He attacked a pregnant woman. I know, and none of that excuses his behavior. But this isn't about right and wrong, Sarah. It's about what can be proven in court and how it looks to a jury. You need to be very careful about what you say to the police. We spent the next 2 hours crafting my statement. I told Detective Williams about the phone call from the bank, about discovering my husband's affairs, about hiring my brother to investigate. I told him about the financial evidence we had uncovered and the confrontation at the gala. What I didn't tell him was that Linda and Rachel had been part of my plan from the beginning. One more question, Mrs. Chen. The night of the gala, when you gave your husband those documents, did you threaten him? I gave him a choice: sign the divorce papers or face the consequences of his actions. I don't consider that a threat. I consider it honesty. Detective Williams looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I think we have everything we need for now. You're free to go, but please don't leave town. We may have more questions as the investigation continues." I drove home feeling like I had aged a decade in a single morning. My mother was waiting with coffee and questions, both of which I accepted gratefully. "David's been arrested. He attacked Linda last night." Her face went white. "Attacked? You mean—" "He broke into her apartment and beat her. She's in the hospital with a broken arm, but she's going to be okay. The baby, too." That monster. That absolute monster. There's more. They found evidence of his fraud when they arrested him. Financial documents, cash he had stolen. It's all going to come out now. Everything I was trying to avoid by giving him a quiet exit. You gave him a chance to walk away with his dignity intact, and instead he chose violence. That's on him, Sarah, not you. I know, but the children. This is going to be in the news. Everyone will know what their father did. How do I protect them from that? My mother took my hands in hers. You can't protect them from the truth. All you can do is be there when they need you and answer their questions as honestly as you can. That's what being a parent means. The next few days were a whirlwind of media attention and legal proceedings. David's firm released a statement distancing themselves from him, expressing shock at the allegations, and promising full cooperation with investigators. His partners, the same men who had been ready to honor him with an award, were now falling over themselves to condemn him. Rachel called me on the third day. "Have you seen the news?" "I've been avoiding it. They're calling him the Wall Street Casanova. There's a picture of him being led out of the police station in handcuffs. It's everywhere." "Good. Let everyone see who he really is." "There's something else. His lawyers are claiming he was set up, that you and Linda and I conspired to destroy him." My stomach dropped. "What? It's all over the internet. They're saying we're gold diggers who targeted a successful man and manufactured evidence to take him down. Some people are actually believing it. I thought about Emma and Michael, about the classmates who might see these stories, the parents who might whisper behind our backs. The damage David was still inflicting, even from a jail cell. Let them believe what they want. We have the truth on our side. Do we? Because right now it feels like the truth doesn't matter. All that matters is who tells the better story. She was right, and I hated her for it. In the age of social media, facts were less important than narratives. David's lawyers were spinning a tale of innocent man versus vindictive women, and plenty of people were buying it. I called James. I need your help again. Name it. David's people are running a smear campaign. They're trying to make us look like the villains. I need something, anything that proves without a doubt that he's been doing this for years. Something that predates his relationship with Linda or Rachel. That's a tall order, sis. Can you do it? A pause, then I'll see what I can find. 3 days later, James called with news that would change everything. I found something big. Tell me. David Chen isn't his real name. He changed it legally 20 years ago when he immigrated from Taiwan. His birth name was David Huang, and under that name he was married before, to a woman in California who died under suspicious circumstances. The room spun around me. What do you mean, suspicious circumstances? She fell from a balcony at their apartment. It was ruled an accident, but there were questions. Neighbors reported hearing arguments. She had told friends she was afraid of him. The investigation was closed due to insufficient evidence, but the detective who handled the case always believed it was murder. Oh my God. There's more. 3 months before she died, she had changed her will to leave everything to her sister. David got nothing. And 6 months after her death, he changed his name and moved across the country. Sarah, I don't think you were his first target. I think this is a pattern. I sat in silence, trying to process what my brother was telling me. The man I had married, the man I had built a life with, might be a murderer, and I had come within inches of ending up just like his first wife. What do we do with this? I've already contacted the detective who handled the original case. He's retired now, but he never stopped believing David was guilty. He's agreed to talk to the Hartford police to share his findings. If they can connect the cases, David could go to prison for life. Yes, but Sarah, there's a risk here too. If David finds out we're digging into his past, if he realizes how much we know, he's in jail. He can't hurt anyone. He's in jail awaiting bail. If he makes bail, if he gets out. I thought about Emma and Michael sleeping upstairs, about the man who had kissed them goodnight 1,000 times, the man who might have killed before and could kill again. He's not getting out, not if I have anything to say about it. The bail hearing was scheduled for the following week. Patricia and I prepared a statement arguing that David was a flight risk with access to offshore accounts and a possible history of violence that extended beyond the attack on Linda. The prosecution was sympathetic, but cautious. The California case was ruled an accident, the district attorney told us. Without new evidence, we can't use it to deny bail. Then find new evidence, I said. That woman deserves justice too. The day before the hearing, I received a visitor I wasn't expecting. Linda Park, her arm still in a cast, appeared at my door with dark circles under her eyes and a determination in her voice I hadn't heard before. We need to talk. I let her in and we sat in the kitchen where I had received the phone call that started everything. I'm sorry, she said, for everything, for helping David try to steal from you, for believing his lies, for all of it. You're not the one who needs to apologize. Maybe not, but I need to say it anyway. I've been thinking a lot since that night, about the choices I made, about what I wanted to believe. I was so desperate to be loved that I ignored every red flag, and it almost cost me my baby. How are you feeling? She touched her stomach protectively. Scared, angry, determined. I'm not going to let him win Sarah. Whatever it takes, I'm going to make sure he pays for what he's done. To me, to you, to that woman in California. You know about that. Your brother called me. He thought I should know the truth about the man who fathered my child. We sat in silence for a moment, Two women bound together by the worst kind of shared experience. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "After all this is over, I'm moving back to California. My parents are there, and I need to be near family. I'm going to have this baby and raise her to be nothing like her father." Her. Linda smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from her. "I found out yesterday. A girl. I'm naming her Hope. Because that's what she represents to me. A chance to start over." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I hope she has your strength. And I hope she never has to know what kind of man her father was. She'll know, eventually. But by then she'll also know that her mother was brave enough to fight back." Linda left an hour later, and I watched her drive away with a mixture of emotions I couldn't name. We would never be friends. Too much had happened. Too many wounds had been inflicted. But we had become something else, allies in a war we had never asked to fight. Tomorrow was the bail hearing. Tomorrow would determine whether David stayed behind bars or walked free. I went upstairs to check on my children. Emma was doing homework at her desk, her brow furrowed in concentration. Michael was building something with Legos, his tongue poking out the way it always did when he was focused. "Hey, Mom," Emma said without looking up. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart. I just wanted to see you." She set down her pencil and turned to face me. "Some kids at school were talking. About Dad? About what he did." My heart sank. What did they say? That he's a bad person? That he hurt people? Her eyes met mine. "Is it true?" I sat on the edge of her bed and took a moment to choose my words carefully. "Your father made some very bad choices. Choices that hurt people, including our family. But that doesn't mean you have to carry his mistakes. You are your own person, Emma. You get to decide who you want to be." "I don't want to be like him." "Then don't be. Be kind, be honest, be brave. That's all any of us can do." She nodded slowly, processing my words. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She got up from her chair, walked over, and hugged me. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, baby. More than you'll ever know." That night, I lay awake thinking about everything that had happened and everything still to come. The bail hearing, the trial, the endless questions from people who wanted to know how I could have been so blind. I didn't have answers for most of them. All I had was the knowledge that I had survived, that my children were safe, that justice, however imperfect, was within reach. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, in the quiet of my home, I allowed myself a moment of peace. Whatever came next, I would face it the same way I had faced everything else, with patience, with strength, with the fierce determination of a woman who had finally learned her own worth. David had underestimated me. He had seen a devoted wife and mother and assumed that meant weak, compliant, easy to deceive. He was wrong. And tomorrow, at that bail hearing, I was going to make sure he understood exactly how wrong he had been. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. I had seen so many legal dramas on television with their soaring ceilings and dramatic lighting that the reality felt almost anticlimactic. Just a plain room with fluorescent lights, wooden benches, and the American flag hanging limply in the corner. But the weight of what was about to happen pressed down on me like a physical force. Patricia sat beside me, her briefcase open on the table, papers arranged with military precision. Across the aisle, David's defense team had set up camp. 3 lawyers in expensive suits, their faces carefully neutral, surrounding a man I no longer recognized. David looked terrible. His hair was unwashed, his face gaunt, dark stubble covering the jaw I had once found so handsome. The orange jumpsuit made him look smaller, somehow diminished. But his eyes, when they met mine across the room, still held that familiar calculation. Even now, even facing charges that could put him away for years, he was working angles, looking for weaknesses. "Don't let him get to you," Patricia whispered. "He's going to try to rattle you. That's what he does." "I know." The judge entered, and everyone rose. The Honorable Margaret Chen, no relation to me or my husband, was a stern woman in her 60s, with a reputation for fairness and zero tolerance for theatrics. I had researched her extensively and felt a cautious optimism about our chances. "This is a bail hearing for the matter of the state versus David Chen." she announced, settling into her chair. Mr. Chen is charged with assault in the first-degree breaking and entering and multiple counts of financial fraud. The prosecution may proceed. The district attorney, a young man named Thomas Wright, who looked like he had barely graduated law school, stood and cleared his throat. Your Honor, the people request that bail be denied in this case. The defendant poses a significant flight risk. He has access to substantial offshore accounts, a history of deception, and the means and motivation to flee the jurisdiction. David's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Richard Hartley, who had represented half the corrupt executives in Connecticut, rose smoothly. Your Honor, my client is a respected member of the financial community with deep ties to this state. He has 2 children who live here, a home, a career. He has no criminal record and poses no danger to the community. The allegations against him are exactly that, allegations. He is presumed innocent until proven guilty. Your Honor, Wright interjected, we have reason to believe the defendant may have been involved in a previous incident of domestic violence that resulted in death. The courtroom stirred. Even Judge Chen raised an eyebrow. That's an extremely serious allegation, Mr. Wright. What evidence do you have to support it? We've been in contact with a retired detective from California who investigated the death of the defendant's first wife 20 years ago. While the case was officially ruled an accident, there were significant concerns at the time about the nature of her death. We believe the defendant changed his name and relocated specifically to avoid scrutiny. Hartley was on his feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. This is pure speculation. My client was never charged with any crime in California. The case was closed. Bringing up unsubstantiated rumors from 2 decades ago is nothing but character assassination. Mr. Wright, do you have any concrete evidence linking the defendant to wrongdoing in the California case? Wright hesitated. Not at this time, Your Honor, but we're working with California authorities to reopen the investigation. Then I'm not going to consider speculation as grounds for denying bail. What other factors should I be aware of? My heart sank. Without the California connection, our case for denying bail was significantly weaker. I looked at Patricia, who was already scribbling notes. Wright continued outlining the financial evidence of David's fraud, the violence of his attack on Linda, the pattern of deception that characterized his entire adult life. Hartley countered every point, painting a picture of a man under extreme stress who had made one terrible mistake but was fundamentally not a danger to society. My client's marriage of 15 years has just ended, Hartley said, his voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. He discovered his wife had been working with his business associates to manufacture evidence against him. He learned that everything he believed about his life was a lie. Is it any wonder he had a momentary lapse in judgment? I gripped the edge of my seat so hard my knuckles turned white. A momentary lapse in judgment. That's what they were calling the assault that broke Linda's arm and nearly killed her unborn child. Your Honor, if I may, Patricia said, rising to her feet. And you are? Patricia Hayes, counsel for Mrs. Sarah Chen. My client is the defendant's estranged wife and has information relevant to this hearing. Judge Chen considered for a moment. I'll allow it. Proceed. Patricia walked to the front of the courtroom, her heels clicking on the hard floor. Your Honor, the defense would have you believe that Mr. Chen is a devoted family man who simply snapped under pressure. But the evidence tells a very different story. For years, Mr. Chen has been systematically defrauding his employer and his wife. He maintained relationships with multiple women, lying to each of them about his intentions. He attempted to steal from a joint safety deposit box by using a woman disguised as his wife. And when his schemes were discovered, his response was not remorse, but violence. She pulled a document from her briefcase. This is a sworn statement from Linda Park, the victim of Mr. Chen's assault. She describes in detail how the defendant forced his way into her home, how he struck her repeatedly, how he threatened to kill her if she testified against him. Does this sound like a momentary lapse in judgment? Hartley stood again. The alleged victim has every reason to lie. She was in a relationship with my client and is now angry that relationship has ended. Her credibility is highly questionable. Your Honor, Patricia continued, Ms. Park is pregnant with the defendant's child. She has no financial interest in this case. Her only motivation in coming forward was to ensure that the father of her unborn daughter does not have the opportunity to harm anyone else. The judge was silent for a long moment, her eyes moving between the two sides. "I've heard enough. Mr. Chen, please stand." David rose, his lawyers flanking him like bodyguards. "Based on the evidence presented today, I find that the defendant poses a moderate flight risk and a potential danger to specific individuals. However, I do not believe the evidence supports complete denial of bail." My stomach dropped. "I am setting bail at $2 million. The defendant will surrender his passport, submit to electronic monitoring, and have no contact with either his estranged wife, Sarah Chen, or the alleged victim, Linda Park. Any violation of these conditions will result in immediate revocation of bail and remand to custody pending trial." $2 million. It was a significant amount, but I knew David. He had access to money that no one had found yet, accounts in jurisdictions that didn't ask questions. If he wanted to make bail, he could. "Your Honor," Wright said desperately, "the defendant has demonstrated a pattern of evasion and deception. We have every reason to believe he will flee if given the opportunity." "I've made my ruling, Mr. Wright. The defendant is remanded to custody until bail is posted. We're adjourned." The gavel fell, and just like that, it was over. David was led out a side door, but not before turning to look at me one last time. His expression chilled me to the bone. There was no defeat there, no resignation, only cold fury and the promise of retribution. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like vultures. Patricia shielded me as we pushed through the crowd, their questions overlapping into an incomprehensible roar. "Mrs. Chen, how do you feel about the judge's decision? Is it true your husband had another wife who died under mysterious circumstances? Do you fear for your safety if he makes bail?" We reached the car and slammed the doors, leaving the chaos behind. "That didn't go the way we hoped," Patricia said quietly. "He's going to make bail. He has the money." "Probably, but the conditions are strict. If he violates them even once, he goes straight back to jail. And in the meantime, am I supposed to just wait for him to come after me?" Patricia reached into her briefcase and pulled out a business card. "This is a security firm I've worked with before. They specialize in protection for high-risk situations. I've already spoken to them about your case. They can have a team at your house within the hour." I looked at the card. Jensen Security Group. The name sounded like something from an action movie. Is it really that serious? "Sarah, your husband attacked a pregnant woman because she rejected him. He has a possible history of violence that may include murder, and now he knows you're the one who exposed him. Yes, it's that serious." I called the security company from the car. By the time I got home, 2 men in dark suits were waiting in my driveway. They introduced themselves as Mike and Carlos, former military, now private contractors. Within an hour, they had installed cameras around the property, checked all the locks, and established a security protocol that made my suburban home feel like a fortress. "We'll have someone here around the clock," Mike explained. "You won't always see us, but we'll be watching. Anything unusual, any contact from your husband, you call us immediately." "What about my children? They have school activities. We'll coordinate with their schools, establish safe routes and pickup procedures. Your kids won't even know we're there." It was surreal, this new reality of bodyguards and surveillance. 3 weeks ago, my biggest concern had been whether to sign Emma up for piano lessons or wait until spring. Now I was reviewing escape routes in case my husband tried to kill me. That night, after the kids were in bed and the security team had settled into their positions, I poured myself a glass of wine and called my brother. "How did the hearing go? He might make bail. $2 million, but we both know he can find that kind of money." "I'm sorry, Sarah. I really thought the California angle would work." "It's not your fault. We just don't have enough evidence yet." I took a long sip of wine. "James, is there anything else? Anything we might have missed?" He was quiet for a moment. "There might be something. I didn't want to mention it until I was sure, but given the circumstances..." "Tell me." I've been tracking David's offshore accounts. Most of them are in jurisdictions that don't cooperate with U.S. authorities, so there's not much we can do legally. But one of them is in the Cayman Islands, and I have a contact there who owes me a favor. What kind of favor? The kind that involves looking the other way while I access some financial records that I'm technically not supposed to see. James, you could go to prison for that. Only if I get caught. And I don't intend to get caught. His voice softened. Sarah, this is what I do. Let me help you. I thought about the man I had married, the secrets he had hidden, the lives he had destroyed. The woman in California who had fallen from a balcony, Linda in her hospital bed, my own children whose father had turned out to be a monster. Do it. Whatever you have to do. I'll be in touch. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back at me was someone I barely recognized. Harder, colder, capable of things the old Sarah would never have considered. Maybe that's what survival does to you. Maybe it strips away the softness and leaves only what's necessary. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it expecting spam and felt my blood freeze. You think you've won, but you don't know what I'm capable of. This isn't over. It will never be over. I showed the message to Mike immediately. Forward that to the police, he said, his expression grim. This is a violation of his no-contact order. Even if he posted bail, this could get him sent back. I called Detective Williams at home. He answered on the second ring, sounding unsurprised. He texted me, threatened me. From what number? I read it off. Can you trace it? We can try. In the meantime, I'll file a motion to revoke his bail first thing in the morning. Forward me that message with a timestamp. I did as he asked, then sat in my kitchen waiting for something to happen. For the police to call back. For David to appear at my door. For the nightmare to end or intensify. What came next was something I never could have predicted. At 2 a.m, my phone rang again. This time it was a number I recognized. Rachel. Sarah, are you awake? I am now. What's wrong? David called me. Somehow he got my number and he called me. When? About an hour ago. He said he was sorry, that he loved me, that we could still be together if I just helped him. Helped him how? He wants me to testify that you and Linda set him up, that we planned the whole thing together, including the attack on Linda. He said if I don't cooperate, he'll tell my employer about our affair, and I'll lose my job. My mind raced. David was violating his bail conditions, contacting me and Rachel, probably others. If we could document enough violations, we could get him locked up again. Did you record the call? No, I didn't think to. Can you get him to call again? Make sure to record it this time. Rachel was silent for a moment. You want me to set him up? I want him to set himself up. All you have to do is answer the phone and let him talk. He can't help himself, Rachel. He'll say something incriminating, he always does. I'm scared, Sarah. You didn't hear his voice. He sounded unhinged. I know. But if we don't stop him now, he's going to keep doing this. To you, to me, to whoever else he decides is an obstacle. This is our chance to end it. Another long pause. Then, okay, I'll do it. But if he shows up at my apartment, he won't. He's under surveillance. The moment he leaves his location, the police will know. I wasn't entirely sure that was true, but Rachel needed to believe it. We all needed to believe something to get through this. The next morning, I woke to news that David had indeed posted bail, $2 million paid in cash by a lawyer who refused to disclose where the money came from. He was fitted with an ankle monitor and released to the custody of his brother, a man named Kevin, who I had only met twice in 15 years. But the violations we had documented worked in our favor. The threatening text to me combined with the call to Rachel, which she had successfully recorded the second time, gave the prosecution grounds to request an emergency hearing. Within 48 hours, David was back before Judge Chen. Mr. Chen, you were explicitly ordered to have no contact with your estranged wife or any witnesses in this case. Would you like to explain these communications? Hartley stepped forward. Your Honor, my client was under extreme emotional distress. He wasn't thinking clearly. These were isolated incidents that won't be repeated. That's the same excuse you used at the bail hearing, Mr. Hartley. I'm not inclined to accept it twice. She turned her attention to David, who stood with his head bowed in what I assumed was manufactured remorse. Mr. Chen, I gave you an opportunity to demonstrate that you could follow simple rules. You failed that test. Your bail is hereby revoked. You will remain in custody pending trial. The relief that washed over me was almost physical. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe, but Hartley wasn't finished. Your Honor, we request a continuance on the trial date. New evidence has come to light that requires additional time to investigate. What new evidence? Evidence that my client was the victim of a coordinated campaign by his wife and her associates. Evidence that the financial irregularities he's accused of were actually perpetrated by others and blamed on him. Evidence that will completely exonerate him of all charges. I felt Patricia tense beside me. This was the play we had feared. Shift the blame, muddy the waters, create enough reasonable doubt to walk free. I'll consider your request, Judge Chen said. But for now, the defendant is remanded to custody. We're adjourned. As David was led away in handcuffs, he turned to look at me one final time. But this time something was different. The cold fury had been replaced by something else, something that looked almost like desperation. Good, I thought. Let him feel what I felt. Let him know what it's like to have everything stripped away. Outside the courthouse, I allowed myself a moment of quiet triumph. David was behind bars. The trial was coming. Justice, however imperfect, was within reach. My phone buzzed. James. I got into the Cayman accounts. Sarah, you need to see this. What did you find? Not over the phone. Can you meet me at my office in an hour? I'm on my way. James's office was in a nondescript building in downtown Hartford, the kind of place you could walk past 100 times without noticing. Inside, it was cramped and cluttered, every surface covered with files and equipment. Look at this, he said, pulling up documents on his computer. David's offshore accounts. I managed to trace transfers going back 5 years. The numbers on the screen made my head spin. Millions of dollars moving through a complex web of shell companies and foreign banks. Where did all this money come from? That's the interesting part. Some of it is definitely from his fraud at the firm. But there's another source, an older source, that predates any of that. James clicked through to another document. 20 years ago, right around the time of his first wife's death, David received a payment of $2 million from a life insurance policy. Standard procedure when a spouse dies. But here's the thing. 6 months later, another payment. Same amount. From a different insurance company. I don't understand. Neither did I at first. So I dug deeper. He pulled up an image on his screen. A document faded with age, bearing a logo I didn't recognize. Sarah David's first wife didn't just have one life insurance policy. She had 3, each one taken out with a different company, each one naming David as the sole beneficiary. The implications hit me like a wave. He was planning to kill her from the beginning. That's what it looks like. He took out those policies over the course of 2 years, spacing them out so no one would connect them. When she died, he collected almost $6 million. And no one investigated. Insurance companies don't talk to each other the way they should. And David was careful. The policies were modest enough individually that they didn't trigger extra scrutiny. It was only by looking at the bigger picture that the pattern emerged. I stared at the evidence on the screen, feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This wasn't just about an unfaithful husband or stolen money. This was about a woman who had died because of the man I married. James, we have to tell someone. The police, the prosecutors. I know, but there's a problem. The way I got this information wasn't exactly legal. If we turn this over, I could face charges, and any evidence derived from it might be thrown out in court. So we have proof that he's a murderer and we can't use it. Not directly, but there might be another way. James leaned back in his chair. The retired detective from California, the one who always believed David was guilty. If I share this with him unofficially, he might be able to find a legal way to uncover the same evidence. It would take time, but it would hold up in court. How much time? Weeks, maybe months. I thought about David sitting in his jail cell, his lawyers working around the clock to free him. About the trial that was coming where Hartley would do everything possible to paint me as the villain. Do it. Whatever it takes. I drove home with my mind racing. The woman in California had a name, a life, a family who had mourned her. I didn't know her story, but I knew how it ended. A fall from a balcony. A death ruled accidental. A husband who walked away with millions and never looked back. That could have been me. If David had grown tired of me, if I had discovered his secret sooner, if circumstances had been slightly different, I could have been another tragic accident, another nameless victim whose death was never properly investigated. The thought made me sick, but it also made me angry, an anger that burned hotter and cleaner than anything I had felt before. David Chen had destroyed enough lives. He wasn't going to destroy any more. When I got home, Emma and Michael were doing homework at the kitchen table. Such a normal scene, such a stark contrast to the darkness I had been swimming in all day. "Mom, can we order pizza for dinner?" Michael asked without looking up. "I'm tired of vegetables." "Sure, honey. Pizza sounds good." I kissed them both on the head and went to my room to change. In the mirror, I saw a woman who had been through hell and was still standing. The lines around my eyes were deeper than they had been a month ago, the gray at my temples more pronounced. But there was something else there too, strength, resolve, the knowledge that I had faced the worst and survived. My phone rang. "Detective Williams." "Mrs. Chen, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We've made progress on the California angle." "Really? What kind of progress?" "The retired detective I mentioned, Sam Torres, he's been reviewing the original case files. He found some inconsistencies that were overlooked at the time. Nothing conclusive yet, but enough to justify officially reopening the investigation." "That's good news." "There's more." Torres reached out to the victim's family, her sister. She's been waiting 20 years for someone to take another look at what happened. She has letters her sister wrote before she died, letters that suggest she was afraid of her husband, that she had tried to leave him multiple times. The parallels to my own situation were inescapable. A wife who sensed the danger, a husband who wouldn't let go, a tragedy that everyone had accepted as an accident. What happens now? Torres is flying out to Connecticut next week to coordinate with our team. If we can build a strong enough case, we may be able to bring additional charges, murder charges. Murder charges. The word hung in the air, heavy with significance. Will that affect the current trial? It could. The prosecution is weighing whether to delay proceedings until the California investigation is complete. A murder charge would change the entire picture. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed and let myself process everything. The man I had married was not just a liar and a thief. He was a killer. And somehow, through luck or fate or divine intervention, I had escaped the same fate as his first wife. Emma appeared in the doorway. "Mom, the pizza's here." I composed myself and followed her downstairs. We ate dinner together, the three of us talking about school and friends and all the mundane things that made up a normal life. And for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe eventually normal was something we could have again. But as I tucked Michael into bed that night and listened to Emma talking to her grandmother on the phone, I knew that normal was still a long way off. There were trials to face, both literal and figurative. There was healing to do for myself and my children. There was a man who wanted us destroyed, and an uncertain future stretching out before us. But for the first time since that phone call from the bank, I felt something that might have been hope. Not the naive hope of the woman I used to be, but something harder and more realistic. The hope of someone who had seen the worst of human nature and chosen to keep fighting anyway. David Chen thought he could break me. He thought I was just another victim to be used and discarded. He was wrong. I cleaned up the kitchen, checked the locks, and waved goodnight to Mike and Carlos, who were settling in for their overnight shift. Then I climbed into bed alone in the room I had shared with a monster for 15 years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow the fight would continue. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of my home, I allowed myself to rest. I had come too far to give up now. The weeks that followed were a study in waiting for the California investigation to progress, waiting for the trial date to be set, waiting for David's lawyers to make their next move. I had never been good at waiting, but I was learning. Patience, I was discovering, was not the absence of action. It was action of a different kind, the quiet gathering of strength before the storm. Sam Torres arrived in Connecticut on a Tuesday. He was in his 70s now, a weathered man with kind eyes and a handshake that spoke of decades of hard work. We met in Patricia's office. The four of us, James and Patricia and Sam and me, gathered around a conference table covered with documents. "I've been waiting 20 years for this," Sam said, spreading photographs and police reports across the table. 20 years of knowing that woman didn't fall from that balcony on her own. 20 years of being told to let it go, that the case was closed, that there wasn't enough evidence. "What changed?" I asked. "Your brother's information gave me a thread to pull, the insurance policies. I went back to the companies, presented what I had, and they agreed to cooperate. Turns out they've been suspicious for years too, but no one ever connected the dots before." He showed me a photograph of a woman with dark hair and a bright smile. She couldn't have been more than 30 when the picture was taken. "This is Jennifer Huang, David's first wife. They met in college, got married right after graduation. Everyone thought they were the perfect couple." "What happened?" "Same pattern you experienced. David was charming at first, devoted, but things changed after a few years. Jennifer confided to friends that he was controlling, jealous, obsessed with money. She tried to leave him twice, but he always convinced her to stay. I thought about my own marriage, about the subtle ways David had isolated me from my career, my friends, my sense of self. I had never thought of it as controlling. I had thought of it as love. 3 months before she died, Jennifer changed her will without telling David, left everything to her sister. I think she knew on some level what he was capable of. She was trying to protect what little she could. And the night she died, Sam's face darkened. They were having a party, about 20 guests celebrating David's promotion at work. Jennifer had too much to drink, according to witnesses. David said he took her out to the balcony for fresh air, and when he turned his back for a moment, she fell. But you didn't believe him. I interviewed everyone at that party. Half of them said Jennifer didn't seem that drunk. A few mentioned hearing an argument between her and David earlier in the evening. And the angle of the fall, it didn't match with someone who simply lost their balance and toppled over the railing. Why wasn't he charged? Because I couldn't prove anything. No witnesses to the actual fall. No physical evidence of a struggle. David was smart. He made sure there was nothing to connect him to what happened. And the department was under pressure to close the case quickly. The family was wealthy, well-connected. No one wanted a prolonged investigation that might turn up embarrassing details. I felt a wave of anger rise in my chest, not at Sam, who had clearly done everything he could, but at the system that had failed Jennifer, the same system that might have failed me if I hadn't discovered the truth in time. "What do we do now?" Sam pulled out another document. "The insurance companies have agreed to provide testimony that the policies were taken out under suspicious circumstances. We have Jennifer's letters to her sister documenting her fear of David. And thanks to your brother, we have the financial records showing how David moved the money after her death. Is it enough for charges? On its own, probably not. But combined with what he did to Linda Park, the pattern of behavior, the financial fraud, a jury might be willing to connect the dots." Patricia spoke up. "The prosecution is considering adding Jennifer's death to the indictment. It's a risk bringing up a 20-year-old case that was never officially solved. But if they can establish a pattern of predatory behavior, it strengthens everything. When will they decide? Within the week. In the meantime, we prepare for trial as if nothing has changed." I left the meeting with Jennifer's photograph in my mind. A woman I had never met, whose life had intersected with mine through the twisted path of one man's cruelty. I owed it to her to see this through, to make sure that David finally faced consequences for everything he had done. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Linda was standing on my doorstep, her belly now prominently visible, her face pale with exhaustion. "Can I come in? I know I should have called, but I was nearby, and I needed to see someone who understands." I stepped aside to let her enter. We hadn't spoken since the bail hearing, both of us wrapped up in our own separate struggles. But seeing her now, I felt an unexpected surge of compassion. "How are you feeling?" She lowered herself onto my couch with a grimace. Huge, uncomfortable, terrified. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "I'm about to have the baby of a man who might be a murderer. How do you think I'm feeling? Have you decided what to tell her?" "When she's older." I've thought about it constantly. Part of me wants to lie to make up a story about a father who died or disappeared. Anything to spare her the truth. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "But I can't. She deserves to know who she comes from, even if it's painful. Otherwise, how will she understand why I made the choices I did?" "You didn't know. None of us did." "Didn't we?" Linda shook her head slowly. "I look back now and I see all the signs I ignored. The way he talked about you with such casual contempt. The way he always had to be in control. The lies that came so easily. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to admit it. I thought about my own willful blindness, the years of excuses and rationalizations. We see what we want to see. That's human nature. Maybe, but I'm going to raise my daughter differently. I'm going to teach her to trust her instincts, to recognize the signs of someone who wants to control her. I'm going to make sure she never ends up with a man like her father. That's the best thing you can do." Linda stayed for another hour. We talked about the trial, about our fears, about the strange sisterhood that had formed between us. When she left, I realized that something had shifted in my perception of her. She wasn't the enemy anymore. She wasn't even a rival. She was just another woman who had been deceived by the same man fighting to build something good from the wreckage. The prosecution made their decision 3 days later. They were going to include Jennifer Huang's death in the indictment. "It's unprecedented," Thomas Wright told me when he called with the news, "bringing up an unsolved case from another state trying to connect it to current charges. David's lawyers are going to fight this with everything they have. Can they win? They'll try to get the California evidence thrown out. They'll argue that it's prejudicial, that it's irrelevant, that we're trying to retry a case that was already closed. But Judge Chen is fair. If we can show a pattern of behavior, she'll allow it. What do you need from me? Your testimony. You're the link between past and present. You can speak to David's character, his pattern of deception, the way he operated. We need the jury to understand that this isn't about one mistake or one victim. This is about a man who has been preying on women for decades." I agreed without hesitation. I would take the stand. I would tell my story. I would make sure that everyone in that courtroom understood exactly who David Chen really was. The trial began on a gray morning in November. The courthouse was surrounded by reporters and cameras, the case having attracted national attention as details leaked to the press. Wall Street fraudster, secret mistresses, possible murderer. It had all the elements of a story that would capture the public imagination. I sat in the front row behind the prosecution's table, Patricia beside me for support. Across the aisle, David's brother Kevin sat alone, the only family member who had shown up. I wondered what Kevin knew, what he suspected, whether he had ever questioned the brother he had helped make bail for. David was brought in wearing a suit that hung loosely on his diminished frame. 2 months in jail had taken their toll. He looked older, smaller, nothing like the confident man I had married. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes. Hatred, fear. I couldn't tell anymore. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. Financial records documenting years of fraud, testimony from David's former partners who had discovered even more irregularities after his arrest, Linda's account of the assault delivered in a voice that only shook a few times. Rachel's recorded phone calls played for the jury in which David attempted to manipulate her into lying. And then came the California evidence. Sam Torres took the stand and walked the jury through his investigation from the initial response to Jennifer's death through the years of doubt and the recent discoveries that had finally provided the pieces he needed. He showed them the insurance documents. He read excerpts from Jennifer's letters to her sister. He explained how David had changed his name and relocated, erasing his past as thoroughly as possible. Hartley objected constantly, trying to break the momentum to create enough doubt that the jury would dismiss the California connection. But Judge Chen allowed the testimony ruling that the pattern of behavior was relevant to the current charges. "Mr. Torres," the prosecutor asked. "Based on your investigation, do you believe Jennifer Huang's death was an accident?" Objection? Hartley was on his feet. Calls for speculation. Overruled. The witness may answer. Sam looked directly at the jury. In my professional opinion, after 20 years of reviewing the evidence, Jennifer Huang did not fall from that balcony. She was pushed, and the only person with motive opportunity and a history of similar behavior was her husband David Huang, now known as David Chen. The courtroom erupted. Judge Chen called for order, but the damage was done. The jury had heard what they needed to hear. When it was my turn to testify, I felt strangely calm. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, rehearsing my answers, bracing myself for the attacks I knew would come from Hartley. But as I took the stand and placed my hand on the Bible, I realized that none of that mattered. All I had to do was tell the truth. The prosecutor walked me through my story, the phone call from the bank, the discovery of David's affairs, the financial fraud I had uncovered, the confrontation at the gala. I spoke clearly and steadily, looking at the jury rather than at David, making sure they saw me as a person rather than just a witness. "Mrs. Chen, did you love your husband?" The question caught me off guard. Yes, for 15 years I loved him completely. I built my life around him, sacrificed my career for him, trusted him with everything. And when did that change? When I discovered that everything I believed about him was a lie. The man I loved didn't exist. He was just a character David was playing. Hartley's cross-examination was brutal as expected. He attacked my credibility, suggested that I had been motivated by greed, implied that I had coordinated with Linda and Rachel to destroy an innocent man. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Chen, that you met with both of your husband's alleged mistresses before going to the authorities?" "Yes." "And isn't it true that you discussed strategy with them, that you planned together how to expose your husband?" "We shared information." 3 women who had been lied to by the same man comparing notes. Is that so unusual? It's unusual when those women then coordinate their testimony to paint a specific picture for the prosecution. "We told the truth. If the truth paints a picture that makes your client look guilty, that's not our fault. It's his." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Chen called for order again. Hartley tried a different approach. "Mrs. Chen, you mentioned that you sacrificed your career for your husband. Do you resent him for that?" "I resent him for lying to me, for stealing from me, for making me believe that our marriage was real when he was planning to discard me the entire time." "So you admit that you have reason to be angry with him, reason to want revenge?" I met Hartley's eyes directly. "I don't want revenge. I want justice. There's a difference." The defense presented their case over the following days. Character witnesses who spoke of David's generosity and charm. Financial experts who suggested that the fraud could have been committed by others. A psychologist who testified that David had been under extreme stress and was not capable of the calculated predation the prosecution described. But the evidence was overwhelming. The documents, the recordings, the testimony of multiple witnesses, all pointing to the same conclusion. By the time closing arguments arrived, everyone in the courtroom knew how this would end. "Ladies and gentlemen," the prosecutor said, addressing the jury, "you have heard from multiple women who were deceived by this man. You have seen financial records documenting years of theft and fraud. You have learned about a young woman who died under suspicious circumstances 20 years ago, and a pregnant woman who was beaten by the same man just months ago. David Chen is not a victim of circumstance. He is a predator who has spent decades targeting vulnerable women, stealing their money, their trust, and in at least one case, their life. It's time for justice." Hartley made his own closing argument, painting David as a flawed man who had made mistakes but didn't deserve to have his life destroyed. He appealed to the jury's sympathy, suggesting that the prosecution had overreached, that the California evidence was too old and uncertain to be trusted. But as I watched the jurors' faces, I could see that Hartley's words weren't landing. They had heard too much. They had seen too much. The truth was undeniable. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. I was sitting in the hallway outside the courtroom when Patricia found me, her face flushed with barely contained emotion. "They're back. It's time." I walked into the courtroom on legs that felt like rubber. The jury filed in, their expressions carefully neutral. David stood between his lawyers, his hands clasped in front of him. For the first time since this began, he looked genuinely afraid. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Chen asked. "We have, Your Honor." The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with gray hair and kind eyes, stood and began to read. "On the charge of assault in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty." My heart pounded. "On the charge of breaking and entering, we find the defendant guilty." Linda, sitting a few rows behind me, let out a sob. "On the charges of financial fraud, counts 1 through 7, we find the defendant guilty on all counts." The prosecutor squeezed my hand. "And on the charge of manslaughter in the death of Jennifer Huang, we find the defendant guilty." The courtroom exploded. Reporters rushed for the doors. David's lawyers demanded a mistrial, their protests lost in the chaos, and David himself stood frozen, staring at the jury as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. I sat perfectly still, letting the reality wash over me. Guilty. On all counts. After 20 years, Jennifer Huang finally had justice. After months of hell, I finally had closure. Judge Chen scheduled sentencing for the following month. In the meantime, David was remanded to custody without bail. As he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he turned to look at me one last time. "This isn't over," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think you've won, but I'll appeal. I'll fight this. You haven't destroyed me." I stood up and walked toward him, stopping just outside the reach of the guards who flanked him. "Look at you, David. Really look. You have nothing left. Your career is gone. Your money is gone. Your reputation is gone. You're going to spend the rest of your life in prison, and no one is going to remember you except as a cautionary tale." I leaned in closer. "You didn't destroy me. You made me stronger. And every day you spend in that cell, I want you to remember that." I turned and walked away without looking back. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but all I saw was my mother pushing through the chaos to reach me. She pulled me into an embrace so tight I could barely breathe. "It's over," she whispered. "It's finally over." "I know, Mom, I know." Behind her, I saw James and Patricia smiling with the satisfied exhaustion of warriors who had finally won their battle. I saw Rachel, who had flown in for the verdict, her eyes bright with tears. And I saw Emma and Michael, who I had decided should be here for this moment, should see their mother standing tall in victory. Emma ran to me and threw her arms around my waist. "You did it, Mom. You beat him." "We did it together, sweetheart. All of us." That night, after the children were in bed and the house was finally quiet, I sat on my back porch and looked up at the stars. The same stars that had watched over me through the darkest months of my life. The same stars that would continue to shine long after all of this was forgotten. I thought about the woman I had been before that phone call from the bank. A woman who believed she had a happy marriage, a secure future, a husband who loved her. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone harder, wiser, more resilient. I wasn't sure if I liked this new version of myself, but I respected her. She had faced the worst and survived. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda, a photograph of a newborn baby with a tuft of dark hair and a face scrunched in sleep. "Hope arrived at 3:47 this morning, 7 pounds 2 ounces. She's perfect." I smiled at the image. A new life born from chaos and betrayal, but carrying none of that burden. Hope would grow up knowing that her mother had fought for her, had protected her from a father who would only have caused pain. That was a gift beyond measure. I typed back a response. "She's beautiful. Congratulations, Linda. You're going to be an amazing mother." Sentencing came 4 weeks later. David received 25 years to life with no possibility of parole for the first 15. The judge called his crimes a sustained pattern of predatory behavior that caused immeasurable harm to multiple victims over decades. She made special mention of Jennifer Huang, expressing hope that the verdict would finally bring peace to her family. Jennifer's sister was in the courtroom that day. Afterward, she found me in the hallway and took my hands in hers. "Thank you. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to believe me about what happened to my sister. You gave me that. I wish I could have known her. She would have liked you. She was strong too in her own way. David just didn't give her the chance you had." We exchanged numbers, promising to stay in touch. Another unexpected connection forged in the aftermath of tragedy. The months that followed were about rebuilding. The divorce was finalized, and I received everything I had asked for: the house, full custody, a settlement that would ensure my children's futures. David's former partners, trying to distance themselves from the scandal, had agreed to most of my demands without a fight. I went back to work, taking a position at a marketing firm that had recruited me based on the publicity surrounding the trial. It felt strange at first re-entering the professional world after so many years, but I discovered that I hadn't forgotten how to be good at my job. If anything, the experiences of the past year had sharpened my instincts, made me better at reading people and situations. Emma and Michael adjusted slowly. There were difficult conversations, therapy sessions, moments when the weight of what their father had done threatened to crush them. But they were resilient, as children often are. They learned to separate the man who had raised them from the monster he had turned out to be. On the 1-year anniversary of that phone call from the bank, I took a day off work and drove to a park near our home. I sat on a bench and watched the leaves fall, thinking about everything that had happened and everything still to come. I had lost so much: a marriage I had believed was real, a future I had planned and saved for, the innocence of believing that the people we love are who they claim to be. But I had gained something too: strength I didn't know I possessed, friendships forged in fire, a new understanding of my own worth that had nothing to do with anyone else. My phone rang, my mother's name on the screen. "Are you okay? You said you were taking the day to reflect." "I'm good, Mom, really good. I'm proud of you, you know. Your grandmother would be proud too." "I know. I feel her with me sometimes, especially when things are hardest." That's the Chen women for you. We don't break. We bend, and then we snap back stronger than before. I laughed, the sound surprising me with its lightness. "I think you're right about that." After we hung up, I stayed on the bench for another hour, watching families play and dogs chase squirrels and life continue in all its ordinary beauty. The nightmare was over. David was in prison. My children were safe, and I had emerged from the fire not as a victim, but as a survivor. That night I cooked dinner for Emma and Michael. We ate together at the table where we had shared so many meals as a family of 4, now reconfigured as a family of 3. The conversation flowed easily, full of talk about school and friends and weekend plans. "Mom," Emma said as I was clearing the dishes, "I have a question." "What is it, sweetheart?" "Do you think you'll ever get married again?" I considered the question carefully. A year ago, the very idea would have seemed impossible. The thought of trusting another person, that completely of making myself vulnerable again, had been terrifying. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe someday, but right now, I'm happy with how things are. I have you and Michael and Grandma and Uncle James. That's more than enough." "Good," she said, and there was relief in her voice, "because I don't think I'm ready for a stepdad." "Then it's a good thing I'm not looking for one." Later, as I tucked Michael into bed, he looked up at me with those dark eyes that still reminded me painfully of his father. "Mom, are you happy?" I thought about the question for a long moment before answering. "You know what, buddy, I really am. It took a while to get here, but yes, I'm happy." He smiled and closed his eyes, drifting off to sleep with the peaceful expression of a child who knows he is loved and safe. I kissed his forehead and turned off the light. Walking back to my room, I paused at the window and looked out at the night sky. The same stars, the same moon, but a different woman looking up at them. The bank had called that morning a little over a year ago with news that would destroy my world. "Your husband is here with a woman who looks exactly like you." I had been terrified, heartbroken, completely unprepared for the storm that was coming, but I had weathered that storm. I had faced my husband's betrayal, uncovered his secrets, and fought for justice, not just for myself, but for every woman he had ever hurt. And I had won. Not because I was special, not because I was stronger or smarter than anyone else, but because when the moment came to choose between being a victim and being a fighter, I had chosen to fight. And I would keep fighting. For my children. For my future. For the woman I was still becoming. The nightmare was over. My life was just beginning.